Hello, hello, hello. It's the Zach64, the Jack of all trades, master of fun, and I'm coming to you with a different type of video. A lot of people ask me a lot of questions around tech when it comes to gaming, especially at 1080p, and like what kind of system they should build, the parts they should use, and really and honestly, there's a plethora out there, but what I want to focus on is the methodology and the mentality when building a 1080p system, especially in 2025. As we know, the graphics card situation is a mess, especially around NVIDIA and their pricing schemes and AI and frame generation and all of those things. So I'm going to address today kind of the mentality that I have when I am doing a build, not only for myself, but for the rest of the team. For those of us who don't know, I'm pretty much the Tony Stark of the team. I build the tech. I am tech support. I'm the person that is essentially in charge of making sure things run smoothly and the production goes well. Riz Alien is the residential editor at the Bronx Couch. So I also got to make sure that, he has a capable system and he can perform his duties as well. And of course, play games and give you the content that you guys enjoy. So let's get started. First and foremost, I just want to kind of set the stage here. So for Murder Meeks, aka Mika, she games predominantly on a television. She games on a 4K TV. So when it was time for me to upgrade her system and really build her a machine that can last for about 3 to 4 years, which is what I would suggest most people do. It used to be a lot easier to build for a 5 or even a 10-year system. 1080 Ti, those who know. You can't really do that anymore. There are going to be real hard cutoffs, especially limitations when it comes to VRAM and the like, and you have to take that into consideration. The technology is moving faster than it ever has before, and because of that, we have to be more realistic, especially when it comes to our budget. Things just don't buy what they're used to. So my mentality for her was to start with the case, and a lot of people do not think about the case. Is almost like an afterthought when it comes to all the other parts, like a graphics card. But I am telling you, it's extremely important, especially when you have kids or smaller members of the family in the house. That also includes pets. If you have large dogs, you really want to take into consideration the case that you're building in and where you are putting it. So with that in mind, I centered around a stealth build for Mika, and I decided to go with the mesh room. It's by a company called Spuds, but they're like a offshoot of Lee. And the reason why I chose this case is that it is fully blacked out, and as the name suggests, all mesh. From the side panels to the top to the bottom, everything is mesh. Another reason why I chose this case is because Mika, being a mom and a professional, has to take into account that her son is going to get curious. So that particular case does not have a power switch in the front. The power switch is in the back. So it would help curious hands not turning off the game during important sessions. Also, because the case is a blackout stealth case, there are no fans in the case that it comes with, nor are there any lights on the case. And that includes activity lights. So because of that, I needed to engineer a way to essentially allow her to know, besides putting her hand like up on the actual device, when the computer is actually on. And what I decided to do was add a RGB fan to the case. And the company I decided to do that with is Corsair. This is an amazing fan, 120 millimeter fan, ARGB. What I really like about this fan is the silence and the operation, but also the colors. The colors are very well situated. They're bright and they're not very dulled out. With that being said, there were some issues that I had to come across. So I have not built in that type of case before, so I did not realize just the dimensions I was dealing with. So I had to put a bracket in. Also, with an ARGB fan, you need to be very certain that your motherboard can support that, which in my case, it did not. And I found that out the hard way when I tried to essentially just plug this into power and get it to operate. And the motherboard I'm using is an AM4 socket, A520i Now, I love this board. I've built with this particular board about 5 different PCs for friends and family, and I've never had an issue. But this one time, I tried to put an ARGB fan for this purpose. it does not have ARGB headers. That didn't deter me. I am a very determined person, so I went on Amazon, tried to find a way to get this to work, and thankfully they did have one. It is a essential splitter where you would plug in this device into your PSU via the SATA cables that it comes with. And by doing so, it will power the fan, and you can actually change the colors with a included remote or the included dongle that it comes with. Just to be clear, it works, but it will not work with software on the computer itself. You have to use the remote. You can choose a plethora of options, but it worked amazing. I love the way that it turned out. It almost kind of looked like HAL if you looked at it directly, turning on at night. And I really like that because when I build my machines, and especially when I build from other people, I try to incorporate things that they enjoy in their personality in the machine. And Mika is a huge horror fan, to a point where we were building this, we were kind of come up with names with the PC, and we all settled on Pinhead from the Hellraiser series because, yeah, she's a huge horror fan, and the case sort of looks like the puzzle box. The what is it called? Jeez, I'm losing my train of thought here. But anyway, this fan is amazing, good airflow, good lights, but you have to make sure that your motherboard also has the headers for ARGB. Also, something else with this motherboard that you have to be aware of, it's AM4. It's a dead platform. Dead. I'm going to tell you right now, for 1080p gaming, you should not worry too much about that, especially on AMD. Yes, it's not the latest and greatest, but you typically do not need this if you're aiming for 60 to 120 frames per second in modern games for about the next 3 to 4 years. I think AM4 is a perfect platform for this. You'll be just fine. But the thing you do have to be wary of with older hardware, especially motherboards, they may not have all of the ports and standoffs that you would need for a modern case. Case in point, this also does not have a USB-C header. So the USB-C port on that case will not work because it is not one present, which is not a huge deal as it's in the front of the case, but the chances of actually needing this is pretty slim. So I'm very happy with the motherboard and how it came out. And I do know that I have mentioned earlier that you would have to use your PSU in order to power that ARGB fan with that other device. Okay, so this is what the computer looks like. The Murder Meeks build, as you can see, it's fully blacked out. There is almost nothing here to betray where the power button is. And as I was explaining earlier, that is the USB-C port that does not work because there's no header on that motherboard to support that. So the way that you would know it's on and the way you turn on the machine is in the back here. You press this button and boom, look at that. This is what I mean by it looks like HAL. It looks like the little circle from, Space Odyssey 2001. And I think this looks particularly well. Also, an added benefit of using the upgraded processor is it comes with its own cooler, a Wraith cooler. As you can see, that is also RGB enabled. So it shines right through the case. It is a fully meshed case, so the light shines through very well. And it looks amazing at night or in a dark area. But as you can see, it's plenty bright enough, very uniform brightness. So it looks very nice. I'm not too sure if that comes off of camera, but it looks like just a solid ring of light, which is great. You can also make out the brackets that I had to use to actually get this thing in there, as you can see on the sides. But I think it adds a bit of character to it. I did say it looked like the Lamont configuration. That's what I forgot to, I forgot the name of it from Hellraiser. But honestly, what I kind of meant is that it has the holes around it like Hellraiser. It does not look like the Lamont configuration. Yeah, I was definitely on something when I was saying that. I decided to go with the Lee & Lee PSU. Lee & Lee SP750. So this is 750 watt power supply. I really like this power supply, and I did not think I would. Again, shout out to Micro Center. They hire some of the best people, most qualified. Again, in my day job, I am in tech, so it is always a sigh of relief to speak to a salesperson who actually knows the lingo, knows the game, knows how to give good advice, rather than just kind of, stumbling through a lot of the things that you would ask and won't tell you they don't know. Best Buy. Anyway, with that being said, Yes, this power supply is amazing. Typically, I do get Corsair, but this time I decided to splurge a little bit. Not only splurge a little bit, it was also they did not have any Corsair, so he suggested this one, and yeah, it works like a charm. The cords are pretty high quality. They are braided. It is a modular power supply, and it's 750. And why that is important is upgradability. In the future, if the CPU is great and you just want to upgrade your actual graphics card, you want to make sure you have enough headroom for that. Also, if you want to switch out your CPU, you have to make sure you have enough wattage to support that. Which brings me to the next sort of issue I ran into with building this computer, and that was with the CPU. So originally, I started with this bad boy here. Ryzen 5 5000 series. It was a 5500, 4.2 gigahertz, as well as having 6 cores and 12 threads. Now, on paper, this sounds perfectly fine to run 1080p gaming. So I thought, until I ran some tests. So in World War Z, a game that we've played quite extensively, please check out the channel to see some footage on that. She was getting around 110, 120 frames per second with a 5060 graphics card. That sounds reasonable, but I figured for something this recent, for a game that old, it should probably be a lot more. And boy, was I right. You'll be surprised sometimes how much FPS you can get, not by changing your graphics card, but by changing another component like the CPU. So I opted instead to switch out that CPU. And because I had the headroom from the power supply, I was confident I can do this because, yeah, switching over to the Ryzen 7 5800 XT, that is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU. It went from 110 to 240 frames per second average. That is a huge jump, and that was the only thing that I changed. Not only did it change the FPS in a lot of CPU-intensive games, it also just made multitasking and other applications feel snappier, such as browsing the web, OBS, and the like. So definitely cannot recommend this CPU enough. It's definitely amazing. And really, both CPUs have their place. The original that I had, the 5500, was great, as it was a very budget CPU, coming in around $60, $70. This CPU, however, will run you about $149. So it's a bit of a substantial upgrade, but one well worth it, in my opinion, especially for this price point. Which brings me to the next and probably the most controversial pick for this build, which is GeForce RTX 5060. Yeah, NVIDIA really shit the bed. I mean, a lot of people are unhappy, especially gamers. This generation did not seem like a huge uptick. But what I will say with NVIDIA is that for 1080p gaming, for more budget builds, it's not that bad. I know, yeah, the bad guy. I'm just saying what I've experienced. It runs well. It runs well, and with things such as frame generation and DLSS, especially DLSS 4, with games that support it, you can see substantial upticks in not only your frame rate, but just stabilities and lows at a very low consumption rate of power, which was very important for this build, as it is small form factor. They will be coming into town, and I will be sending them back with these machines, and they have to be able to fit in a suitcase. That was also a consideration that I had to take. And because, again, she's playing on a television and not a monitor, it'll be in the living room, so it has to be aesthetically pleasing as well. So it has to be something that you can, move around, put in a different place. You decide to kind of remodel your space. So with that being said, I decided to go with the 5060. It is small enough to fit in that case. I wouldn't exactly say it is low profile. There are much smaller graphics cards that you can get, and I think the 5060 does have a low profile version of this. But the real draw is that it takes very little amounts of power. It doesn't take that much power. So therefore, it doesn't generate a lot of heat. So therefore, it's better situated for small factor cases and to put in actual small spaces like a TV cabinet. I don't suggest you do this and cover it all up because it still needs to breathe, but you get the point. My testing with this card has definitely proven that it can handle 1080p gaming perfectly fine. The VRAM is always a concern, but I don't see it being much of a concern when you can use things such as the DLSS4, which also benefits from the processor choice as well as frame generation. I cannot tell the future. Only the future will let me know if I'm correct or not, but I do think for that 3 to 4 year mark, she should be fine playing at medium to high settings above 60 frames a second, really and honestly at around 100 frames a second with no issues for these future titles. Now, bumping up to 1440p, that is definitely going to be an issue, especially with the newer titles that are more graphically demanding, Black Myth, Wukong, things like that. But honestly, on the channel and for her taste, we don't really play games like this, so I don't see that being a huge concern moving forward. But I will monitor the situation and make a follow-up video if you kind folks decide that that is something I should do. So please let me know in the comments. With that all being said, the one component that I will definitely say is a standard in PC builds for 2025 is that you are going to definitely need 32 gigs of RAM. That is not negotiable. 16 is just not going to cut it anymore. Especially if you're doing content creation and you have things like OBS running in the background, recording your gameplay. It's just not going to be enough. Eventually, you're going to hit a bottleneck. And for the prices for these sticks, I believe I paid around $84 for these. You could definitely find a deal or two if you're willing to shop around, but I think it's money well spent. These are DDR4 sticks. Again, this is an AM4 platform, not AM5, so there's no reason to spring for the higher speed of RAM. I would say if you had a choice between speed and capacity, you should definitely go for the capacity, as that is probably going to give you the most dividends when it comes for gaming. For other applications, I cannot speak to. I'll let Ron speak to that. But with that being said, that was my mentality around the bill for Mika, aka Murder Meeks. But don't want this to drag on too long. The gist of the matter is I'm very happy with the bill. I think it came out well. It definitely hits high frame rates. It does 1080p extremely well. It's a very silent system, especially since we are using solid state drives and the like for storage. I decided to go with the Kingston WD Blue for the main drive where you're installing the OS, again at 2 terabytes. This was a great buy. And for her storage drive, which I do suggest, that is one thing I don't see a lot of people suggesting. I suggest it all of the time because accidents happen, things happen. Have a separate drive for recording your videos or anything else that you're doing for content creation. So that way, if your main PC dies, meaning the main hard drive dies, there's water damage, something happens, you can just pull that drive out, put it in another machine, or put it in a toaster. There's a little thing you put it inside of and you plug it through USB and you can pull the data off easily. When you have a drive that has an OS on it, it tends to be a bit more tricky because that is a boot drive, but this is very technical stuff that I'm not going to go through in this video. Definitely separate the drive. So in her machine, just to recap, she has the 750 PSU in the ITX case, AM4 platform by Gigabyte, great company by the way. WD Blue, 2 terabyte, but I had another 2 terabyte Samsung drive that's a SATA drive for her to store her recordings. Again, I had it lying around, so I see no reason not. So that's 4 terabytes of total capacity in that machine. 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and the AMD Ryzen 7 5800 XT. Jesus, that is a mouthful. And of course, for the graphics cards, your 5060 RTX. All of that came to about $1,100, $1,000, which honestly, again, I'm an old timer. I wouldn't say an old timer. I'm a seasoned gamer. Let's say that. I remember the time when $1,000 got you a very either medium or high end machine. Now $1,000 is looking like the entry level, especially if you want some longevity in your machine. Yes, there's people out there with bills for $600, $400, but you're making a lot of caveats, a lot of sacrifices, a lot of cuts to get there. And in my opinion, I don't see that being a long-term solution. That'll probably last you for about a year, 2 years, and is severely going to limit the type of experiences you can have on such a machine, where I think the $1,000 mark is going to get you in a very good place, good investment for 3 to 4 years, which I think is reasonable if you parse that out per year, per cost. But yep, that's it all there is for me at the moment. Leave anything else you want me to talk about in the comments, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.